Well, Barney, good to be together again for our fourth and final interview on sparking church planting movements.
Yeah, likewise, Steve. Good to catch up.
So, just remind us, where have we come from so far?
Okay, the first three things we've looked at the first one was called Head, so talking about knowing and understanding CPM thinking, how the kingdom grows, etc. Second one being Heart, focusing around the practitioner themselves, things in their own life that are important to be the kind of person that God would use. The third one we talked about was Hands, which refers to doing, so more nuts and bolts and some... that's a very big area, so we really only touched on that, but the whole thought of the different practical outworking of skills and what's involved to actually see a CPM happen in terms of the things you do. And so that's where we come from. And the fourth one today we're going to talk about is the whole thought of house, and basically the meaning is referring to relating to others, working with the wider body of Christ in order to see a CPM happen.
Okay, so it's not just relating to people in the work you're doing or the network you're involved in, but it's relating to the wider body of Christ to reach a particular region or people group.
Yeah, that's right. The basic thinking is that, on your own, it's very unlikely that you on your own are going to see a people group or city or whatever region reached. And there's the need to really, and we'll flesh this out a bit more, but to connect much wider and use the resources, being people resources, even some real practical resources that really are available beyond our own scope or what we have access to, and to really try to connect much wider and channel those efforts to see a people group reach or city reached.
Okay, well, tell us a bit more about house and relating.
Sure, okay. Well, the first one that sort of goes under this section is the need to work with, and in my situation being a missionary, the need to work with national believers as much as possible. So in terms of a context, if you're working, say, in Australia or wherever, where you're living amongst the people, the key there would be to think about trying to work with the people from that particular group you're trying to reach as much as possible, as opposed to primarily relating to believers that are outside the culture of the people you're trying to reach.
Okay, I'm just thinking, so they're locals or local to the area or people group you're reaching who are new believers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, trying to work with those folks as much as possible. It's not saying that you don't work with others outside that, but in terms of when a CPM is going to happen, it's the basic biblical principle, if we look at Acts, is that the gospel will flow through people of the same oikos, so the network of families and relationships. And the people that are going to reach the people that are going to primarily be the ones that God will use to reach a particular people group is more likely to be those people from within that culture or within that particular subculture or subsection of society, whatever it is. And so the need to really relate and train and develop those people as much as possible.
So I was just thinking, Tim Shire up in Sydney, and we've just been away with him and his team and some others. Now, everyone on his team, Tim is an outsider who's, seeks to connect with people in that community, but everyone else on his team are either new believers from the community or they're believers with a heart for evangelism and making disciples and are from the community. So he's, and I've heard others talk about the whole outsider, insider. That Tim is an outsider identifying with this culture, but he hasn't grown up in it. And so he's trying to mobilize insiders.
Yeah, that's really important. I think regardless of whether you're in a situation where, well, my situation where I live in another country that's not my own, where I'm a missionary, whether it's my situation or whether it's in Australia where somewhere like Tim or someone else, as an outsider, you come into the context or come into the culture and begin the first people to Christ or train existing local believers in that area or from within that people group. But very quickly there needs to be the sense of building up and equipping the locals, like Tim's doing, because that's how the gospel is spread. And even if you're from outside the area and you identify as much as you can and you do everything you can, you're still an outsider. And it doesn't matter how much you try to be like one of them, the reality is you're not one of them.
And Grant, you'd say that about yourself. You've been in the part of the world you're in now, oh goodness, for at least a decade or more. You know the language, you're fluent in the language. Sure. But your focus is that's your stepping stone to seeing an insider movement in the culture.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Everything we've seen happen here in terms of, and we've been very blessed to see God, over 1,000 churches have been planted, thousands of believers. It's all happened through local believers happening. It hasn't been through my amazing efforts. I begun the work, led the first people to Christ, trained and developed them, taught them how to lead others, and away they went. But right from the start, I always had this understanding very quickly that my role is very, very limited. So even though I've been living here and I travel around the country I live in for a long time, people will still treat me as a foreign guest, and people will still say, "Welcome to this country." And I sort of laughed at myself thinking, for some of the people who say that to me, I've been here, especially young people, longer than they've been alive, which is really funny. And a lot of, but that's the reality. I'm not from this culture. My parents aren't from this culture. I wasn't born here, etc. So we'll always be an outsider. And I think that's a really important principle that you even see in Paul did it. He would, in the book of Acts, he'd go to an area, start the church, but very quickly he would move on and leave the development of the church to the local folks, those who lived in the area, and appointed elders and appointed people from within that particular culture and area. And this is a really important thing to do if we're going to see a CPM happen.
Yes, it's just an interesting contrast because there's a lot of talk in Western Christianity about being incarnational, which is what you seek to identify with the culture and the people you're with. But there's a lot of focus on what we do as the worker. Rather like, in the 19th century, the focus is on what the missionary does in the culture, rather than is the gospel, has it become an insider movement that is spreading from person to person? So we spend a lot of time focused on ourselves. Am I incarnational? Am I identified? But not much time in the West on, is the gospel spreading amongst insiders?
Yeah, and in fact, it's a really important thing because often I think, not always, but I think a lot of the reason why the gospel doesn't spread, whatever culture it is because of the person who began the work becomes a bottleneck, and there's too much emphasis around that particular person, whether it be they're a charismatic leader, whether it be they've got control issues, whether it be they have a wrong understanding of what it means to be a minister of the gospel and don't spend enough time equipping, releasing people and doing themselves out of a job. That kind of thinking in many places is really foreign, and hence the work doesn't spread like it should. And I think whether it be you're looking, obviously, Paul is the example in the book of Acts, or whether you just see what's going on around the world now, what God is doing in case studies, any movement where significant numbers come to Christ, it's always through local believers. God always uses the local believers to do it. And many times in my situation, I've found that God has bypassed me, which is a really good thing. I'll be wondering what to do in a situation. We face a particular issue in our work, and I'm racking my brain trying to come up with, okay, Lord, what should we do here? And the answer's already been given. God's already spoken to the locals, and then they tell me what to do, what we should be doing. And it's like, yeah, that is the key. And yet God bypasses me. And very, very important, very healthy, and very necessary to see CPMs happen.
Okay, but you have in the past been the catalyst or the pioneer to go into a situation where, an area or a people group that's unreached. So what sort of people do you look for to ensure that it becomes an insider movement? What do you do with those people?
Yeah, okay. I've touched on this briefly before in one other sort of session we had. But essentially the need in terms of making sure you get the right people is you have to train. You've got to train and mentor the right people, the right leaders. Essentially they're doers, people who are going to go and do the stuff. It's those people who are going to train other people to do the stuff. So a term that's often used is training trainers, or training people who are going to go and pass on what you've taught them. They're going to go and do the stuff that you've modelled and shown.
But when you talk about training trainers, this is not just, these people are excellent trainers.
No.
You're looking for people who are committed to, who are faithful and fruitful in the ministry, and you're equipping those people to become trainers of trainers. They're training out of their engagement and involvement in making disciples.
Very much so, yes. So training in this context, or this kind of thinking rather, is different in many ways to what we might typically think of training in the West, or even a lot of other non-Western cultures in terms of training. Training essentially means, I used a phrase one other time called model, assist, watch, leave. And basically what it means is a trainer is somebody in this context, and CPM is someone who models how to do it. They assist others how to do it. They watch them from a sort of come and go, watching from a distance. Then they leave and begin a new work, or leave, begin a new stream of churches, whatever it is. So the training is very practical. It's very hands-on. And this kind of person is showing by example and modelling and speaking into someone else's life what they themselves have learned and what they themselves have seen. So it's not a case of just gathering people in a room and giving a thing for a day or 2 days. It's much more than that. That's important, but it's actually practically implementing and showing others how to do it. And training on the job is what's important. So it's basically...
And those people, because we're in this whole area of house relating, they may be part of your direct ministry or network, but they may also be others in parallel ministries or networks of churches that you're training, because the whole goal here is to mobilize the whole body of Christ.
Sure, that's right. So it's looking for people who, regardless of what, what network they're from or whatever church they're from, people who are really willing to do the stuff. And there are always people out there, and this is what's required in order to reach a city. One church on its own is never going to reach a city, or one denomination on its own is never going to reach an area or a city. It just doesn't happen. But where significant numbers comes to Christ is always across many different churches and across many different denominations, whatever the context might be, of people who have been trained and equipped to be able to make an impact. And together, God is going to use right across the body a number of people to do to reach a people group. Now, the churches that have started may look slightly different, and it depends on their particular flavour or their particular thinking, but the basic principles will be in place for each church. But how it fleshed out may look slightly different. But what matters is that you've got a number of people. You've got a wide spectrum of people that efforts are being channeled towards trying to reach a people group.
But I notice, again, an important difference to what we tend to default to in the West, where our assumption is let's all cooperate together. So we spend a lot of energy building unity, and
right.
Then we can do mission. This, what you're describing is we're going to do mission, and we're looking for people who are ready to take action, who are ready to do something right across the board in terms of, the wider body of Christ, and we're going to go do something. So it's more action-oriented. So unity is flowing from mission rather than mission from unity.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Steve. Yeah, for sure. It's a case of putting the need out and saying, who wants to be trained? Who wants to be equipped? And I think, again, Tim Shire, he's done a very good job down in Sydney. It's saying, okay, here's the need. Here is the goal to reach city X or suburb Y, whatever it might be, people group, whatever, and seeing who puts their hand up to say, yeah, I'm willing. A common phrase might be a willing partner. It's looking for willing people who want to be trained, who are tired of the status quo, who know that we must be able to do a better effort than what we're doing here, and finding these people. And when you find them, really engage with them and train them and equip them, because there are people out there, regardless of whatever church or whatever denomination they're from. And as you said, as you train and equip, there is a sense of unity that develops out of the mission. There is a sense of we're all working together on this thing. We're like an army moving forward. This does develop. Because what can tend to happen if you try to go to unity first, most things default to the lowest common denominator. It gets messy. It loses its focus. Things get caught up and tripped up on very minor details that really will not see people saved, the church is planted. But if you go the other way first, then out of that will flow a sense of unity, yeah.
Okay. Well, what else have you got in this heading of house related?
Okay. Sure. Another thing that's really important is this thought of need to build accountability and reproduction. So regardless of who you're training, whatever church they're from or whatever denomination, they need to be accountable for reproduction. So it's not just accountability in terms of a personal sense, which is important, like we often have, in terms of asking each other how your walk with God's going, what areas are you struggling with this week, blah, blah, how can I pray for you? Well, that's really, really good. But this actually goes beyond that and says from a ministry standpoint, it's looking at people that you're in terms of your training, how they invest in their time. Are they doing things that would consider we would get to reproduction? Looking at really what you stop doing as opposed to really what you start doing, because many times we do a lot of good stuff, but it's not very helpful. This kind of thing, and to do it in an encouraging and loving way. So it's not coming down on top of people to say, so that people get fearful about their time that you're going to spend with them in terms of asking how this last week or this last month has gone. It's not like that, but it's trying to help people in a loving way see that that there really aren't really a lot of stuff that we need to do to see reproduction happen, but it's doing those things well, and that if we do them well, then we're more likely to see people saved and churches started. So accountability for reproduction is very important.
And that could be either a one-on-one coaching or supervision relationship, or it could be with a group of peers.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. I mean, I know I do it myself with a lot of folks. People I train do it with their folks. It can be a one-on-one. It can be in a group. I think the important aspect really of this is the need to honestly evaluate. I think this is the key: is honestly evaluate how we're spending our time and is it effective. A person that I respect greatly in the CPM world, who is really one of the leading people in terms of been doing this for many, many years and trains many people. He once did an exercise for the training he was doing of missionaries. And he did this exercise, but he had to stop it because it was just too upsetting for people. He asked them to write down how they spent their week. On any given week, the time, these are full-time workers, how they invested their time, what their day might look like or a week might look like. And then looked at it and said, now, how many of these things are actually engaged in reaching the lost? And most activities that people did was all good, but very few could actually say, look at their time and say, yes, I was sharing the gospel here, I was doing this here to see this person saved, or I was training this people to multiply the church. Most of it was a lot of other good stuff, but wasn't actually good stuff that was great stuff, I guess, that would lead to accountability in terms of reproduction. So he actually stopped the exercise, which I thought was interesting because it was too upsetting for people. But his point is that whether you're a pastor in a local church and wherever in Australia, or even you're a missionary on the field doing whatever, for most people, they don't always spend time doing stuff that really matters. And it's a hard one because it need to really evaluate. If we're going to see a CPM happen, you have to stop doing a lot of stuff, and that can be quite hard.
Yeah, so part of the relating side of things to the wider body is to find those people who want to dive in and do this stuff and train others, but also working with them to help them disengage from a lot of non-productive but good ministry. Non-productive in the sense it's not directly contributing to making disciples.
Yes, sure. Yeah,
I think we could all say in a very roundabout way what we do is making a difference. But what you're saying is you need to be tougher on yourself from that. You need to really evaluate, is there a direct impact in people's lives? Are we making opportunities to share the gospel, make disciples, form churches? Do these activities in your diary reflect those priorities?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think what's important is you brought out a good point. Regardless of which church or which denomination you're in, we're all involved in stuff that's important, and sometimes depends on people's situation. They can't always change that because of their role or their ministry responsibility or whatever. But again, to bring it back, if you're going to see a CPM happen, doing certain things is really important to see a CPM happen. And it's very likely if these things don't happen, you won't see a CPM. So it comes back, I guess, to what are you aiming for? If you want to plant a church, a single church, as good as that is, and that's great, and God calls people to do that, of course, then what that looks like, pastoring a local church and all the myriad of stuff that involved in that, as good as it is, that won't get you to CPM. CPM requires different ways of thinking. It requires a different investment of your time. And one important thing in terms of investment of time when it comes to this house relating is how many people are you training right across the body? How many people are you connecting with who are putting their hand up to say, I want to know how to win people and start a church? And you've got to look much much wider beyond your own particular church or your own particular network, but really look real wide, because it's going to take a lot of people trained to see a CPM happen. The thinking basically is that maybe only 15 to 20% of the people you ever train are actually going to go and do the stuff. And this is based on very, very experienced practitioners who are seeing hundreds of thousands come to Christ in some parts of the world. These people who, this is all they do. Look for people who want to be trained how to win others and start churches. And even the best people at doing this will say maybe 15, maybe 20% of people will actually do it. So if you just stick with people that are in your own church, very soon you're going to run out of people. And so there's the need to go much, much wider to really weed down those people who are going to train others, those people who are going to go and do the stuff. That's why it's so important to relate very wide, because if we don't, we're not going to see the workers for the harvest raised up.
Okay, so you've got to juggle a couple of realities then. One is, to be an effective trainer, you really need to be engaged locally and be training out of your own experience. But then to see a broader movement, you've got to be willing, alongside of that, to be training all sorts of people who are willing to learn, and then looking for those who follow through and investing in them. Yep.
Yes, exactly. Yep. That's exactly right.
I've just on the whole challenge of saying no to other things, I've noticed a pattern with some of the folk here in Australia who've gone this paradigm shift. And what happens is they get exposed. Some of them through hearing you speak when you've been out here, and they get exposed, and they make some decisions to go do this stuff, to go share the gospel, make disciples, and some of them doing it in their spare time in the midst of pretty demanding pre-existing commitments.
Sure.
And they might do that for a number of months, 6 months or so, and something grips them. Something gets them excited, and they just... and it unfreezes them. So all of a sudden, they're asking big questions about their time commitments and their current ministry role, if they're in a ministry setting. And a number of people I know have walked away from leading national ministries or churches in their hundreds that they've planted, because God's called them to a wider ministry of making disciples, planting churches, training others. And I've seen this happen about 4 or 5 times now here. People who... So there was a few steps in the process, getting excited, getting involved, getting gripped by this thing, and then after 6 months to a year, having to reorder their whole life and ministry. And none of them regret what they've done. Yeah.
I think you would find that would be a common story worldwide. Those who really grab a hold of this, and when they start seeing things happen, it really does come down to, am I going to... Well, you suddenly get this realization of, gee, if I'm really going to see something happen here, I've got to say no to a lot of stuff. And if I say no to a lot of stuff, then ultimately probably there needs to be a change of role in your ministry. Now, it comes... And I think this is interesting, because not everybody can do it. And not everyone can do it. And... It's really like it's a death experience, I think. You really do have to die to ambition. You have to die to potentially being someone who's really well known. Because to do a CPM role, you very much, the goal is to raise up people that are going to be far, far better than you. And the goal is to equip and train people who are going to be far more fruitful than you could ever be. The goal is to train and equip and to raise up locals from the area, and which means very quickly, right from the start, there needs to be thinking, I've got to do myself out of a job as soon as possible, because if I don't, I'll be a hindrance to the movement. So that kind of thinking means that for some people, they're going to really struggle because they're no longer going to be the big preacher. They're no longer going to be the big leader. Now, this may sound harsh, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but this is the practical realities. If you're going to see a CPM happen, you've got to die to a lot of ambition, and because if you don't, then it's unlikely to ever happen. A CPM will unlikely to ever happen.
And
so not everyone can do it. And
yes, not everyone's not everyone's called to do it, because we know that
sure.
There's a sizable number of people who joined Paul and his team for periods of time on mission, but he never expected the whole of the Church of Antioch or Ephesus to move out and travel with him. But there are a really critical percentage of people, you're saying, who are called to make this the main focus of their life and ministry. And so these steps that you've talked about so far of head knowing, heart being, hands doing, house relating, each one of them is key for the people with that call on their life. Each one is also helpful for anybody in the body of Christ. But what you're saying is there are going to be some people listening to this podcast that do need to get engaged at a very grassroots level and do this stuff, and it is going to lead to some major life and ministry change. But you don't have to start at that point. God will bring them to that point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve. You've worded it well. Not everybody is called to do CPM, and if people aren't, then that's great, no problem. The key is to do whatever God calls you to do, and that's what you should be doing, and that's what you're going to be best at doing, whatever that might be. But if anyone's listening and they have this thought of, gee, I think God really could be in wanting me to maybe change my path, alter the way I've been doing stuff. Sooner or later, there is this. We'll get faced with this. I guess it's a death experience where you have to die to maybe a lot of stuff you've done in the past, ways of thinking, a role, whatever it is. Sooner or later, it needs to happen, because it's like that whole thought of, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground, it's not going to produce a whole lot of fruit. And for many times, that kernel falling to the ground is the person who is going to initiate and start the movement. The death experience will be, you might start it, but very quickly you have got to move out of it and raise up many, many more people much better than yourself. And that's what's required. So it's very, very important.
Okay, so there's a strategy and principle side to this. There is also a heart. I know we talked early on about the whole question of heart, but God has to do a work in us to free us from ambition, free us from the need of the satisfaction of seeing, our own successes. And in order that we would stay focused on a much greater harvest.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't talked about it this time, but a lot of people, I think, make a mistake of saying, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? Or what ministry do you want me to do? What should I be doing? And I often think that's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is more, God, what do you want to do in this country or this city or this particular people group? And what's my part in it? And once we understand that, it's not starting with us, Lord, what do you want me to do, but what do you want to do, Lord, and what's my part in it? When we go that way, very quickly we will find out what's our most effective role. In terms of CPM, it's always going to be raising up sharing the gospel, but raising up and training right across the board as many people as we can. Very important. One other thing I'll add, Steve, just in this area before we finish up on this this house relating, is the importance of protecting the movement from DNA that would halt or slow it down. So on one hand, there is this tension because on one hand, we are trying to say you've got to engage with as many people as possible. Yet at the same time, in the engaging process and training up process, you do have to make sure that there is not the wrong DNA or the wrong thinking that get introduced into the movement, because it will halt it or slow it down. And there's many situations and many case studies. Even we were talking a bit earlier, Paul in the New Testament had to deal with a lot of the stuff of foreign thoughts being introduced into a movement, because it really does have quite a negative effect on it.
So that bad DNA is bringing other agendas that detract from, the importance of sharing the gospel, making disciples, multiplying churches. I'll give you a typical example that's a common situation, and we have seen it raise its head slightly in a situation here, is that someone will come along. It happens in two areas, really, two different areas that's very, very common in church planting movements. One is church planting movements tend to be, meetings will always be held in places other than church buildings. So houses, storefronts, restaurants, wherever, anywhere other than a church building as we would know church. Someone comes along down the track, usually not at the start, it's usually down the track a bit, and say, hey, how about I help you build a church building? If you had a church building, then you could gather more people together, you could do this, you could do that, and the movement always halts. This happens many, many times. Why does it halt? Because the DNA is, instead of going from starting multiple churches, many, many churches, wherever in people's homes, it now moves to let's gather a whole lot of people into a single building, and straight away you've lost a key important element of a CPM. That's a very common problem. And that's usually happens not because the person who started the movement has that, but down the track someone comes in from the outside and introduces this. Another thing is funding. And the idea is that you want churches, pastors, whatever that might look like in the particular movement, to be self-supporting, whether it be our tent makers or whether the church themselves pays them, whatever. But the money comes from within. Down the track, people come along and start introducing all kinds of funding. That's a problem. So the funding is coming from external sources.
External sources, yes, not from within the movement.
And it distorts the whole thing.
Yeah, it distorts the whole thing. Yeah, it stops this thought of each church is responsible to financially support their own causes, their own outreaches, their own whatever. And then you've got this foreign, not necessarily foreign as in literal foreign, but money from outside the movement. Another one is training, a wrong DNA of training, where training is done more on the job, smaller, 1 day or weekend trainings or 1 week modules, that kind of stuff. Someone comes along and offers to build a Bible college. Straight away that'll halt the movement or stop it. That's another common problem. Now, the challenge with all this is that because we don't work in a vacuum, it's very hard to sometimes stop these things happening. Very hard. But just got to, I guess I always think that you got to hope, you got to pray, and got to trust the Lord that what's been sown in the DNA at the early stages will, for the bulk of people, because not everybody is going to stick with it, but the bulk of people will say this is far better than what is being introduced. And hopefully that in itself is going to be enough to protect the movement from going forward. It will always have an effect. You can't help have an effect when something foreign is introduced, but the hope is that enough people have got it so that they don't go with this foreign DNA thought.
Yeah.
Very important.
Now, I'm just thinking in rounding out this whole relating more broadly to mobilise others, where would you suggest, just in practical terms, that people get started doing that?
In terms of how to relate more broadly?
Yeah. In terms of that whole house, that fourth principle.
Okay. I think depends on the person who wants to get going in this. If they're a church leader, or if they involved in ministry in some shape or form, but not in full-time ministry, it would look very different. But I think, first of all, the person themselves has to get the training or get exposed to this kind of thinking and go through some training themselves and have a go themselves. And then once they've got a heart for a particular area or city or suburb or whatever, and they themselves have experienced how to do it, they're living it out, then from there, just simply asking around people, sowing the vision in terms of who would like to join them in this. One real simple way, if you're if your heart is for a particular area, is to approach churches in that area, and ask them how they've gone in the last 5 years, 10 years in terms of reaching out, and help them to practically look and see, gee, at this rate, it's going to take us 500 years or 100 years or whatever to reach this area at this particular rate of people we've seen saved. And then sow in the vision and say, look, if I was to help train you and equip you to see it happen much faster, would you be interested? So it's basically seeing who's going to stand up and say, yeah, I would like that. So it's basically putting out feelers. Once you yourself have experienced it and got some training, put it into action, and then just basically asking and see who's going to be interested. There's really probably no other way to do it other than actually going out, connecting, sowing a vision, and offering to help train. By doing that, you'll start building some momentum. When people start having some success in terms of seeing people saved, people being discipled, then they themselves will tell others, and then that way the whole thought of relating to many people can begin forming. Okay,
so it's not a broad cooperative effort where there are a lot of committees and the like. It's really getting engaged yourself, getting experience, beginning to train, to cast vision and to train others, and looking for those who receive the training, go and put it into practice, and then helping them become trainers of others.
Sure. Yep, that's right. Yeah, you definitely want to always focus on those who are doing it, and invest as much time in those who want to go and do it, and those who are training others. And if you get enough of those people, the movement will begin spreading. Yes, you certainly want to avoid any kind of committees and all that kind of stuff. It's always going to be with people who want to put their hand up and say, I want to give this a go. And again, for those people who put their hand up, some will do it well, some will do it okay, and some may not even go ahead and do it. But that's okay. It's investing in those who really want to and who are really doing the stuff.
Okay, Barney, is there anything else? Because this is going to close out this series now. Is there any other wisdom you would share with us?
I guess maybe in closing, I would say that it always comes down to, regardless of whatever the tools are that you use, it always comes down to the person. It's not a case of saying you want to focus more time on being than doing. It's always a both and. There's being the person that God is going to use and going and doing the stuff. There's always a healthy balance, and I think that often in many cases there can be a focus on one or the other. That if I'm just a certain kind of person, that somehow God's going to use me. That's not always the case, because we know that's typically the many people who have got great character and all the attributes, but they're not seeing many come to Christ and many churches planted. But then the other side is also important, that if we spend too much time on the doing stuff and not enough on the being, then at the end of the day, it's all going to come crashing down. And we see a lot of this where, and whether it be in Western context or where we are, that it's character that at the end lets people down. So there's always a healthy balance between the two. And I guess I would say to anyone listening is, get the training, get involved, and get in as much as you can, get exposed, get around people who are doing the stuff or who want to do the stuff, get in the environment. This whole thought of iron sharpening iron in Proverbs, you can learn from one another. For some people listening, it's going to be a case of making some big alterations in how they spend their time. But there's enough people out there doing this stuff now. The whole CPM thinking, obviously, it's biblical, but there is over the last 15 to 20 years now, there are many people now that in this day and age are practically seeing the stuff happen. Thousands coming to Christ, hundreds to thousands of churches being planted. And there are enough people out there that now are willing to want to help others. And so finding and connecting with these people and learning as much as you can from them. And then I believe if you spend enough time doing that, then God can really use you. Yeah. And God can use you to see a people reached or city impacted or suburb reached in far greater ways than what you've ever done up to this point. So I guess I'd finish by saying that.
Well, they're good words to finish on. I know through my involvement locally here with Michelle, it's changed me. And it's just interesting to see in my own case how much just stepping out and obeying has brought about a change in who I am. So it actually started with obedience and then led to a change of heart.
Great. Wonderful.
So if an old guy like me can learn, I'm sure anyone listening here can learn.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great testimony. Wonderful, Steve.
Okay, Barney. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll put this up on the blog and make just some notes available for people who want to use it as a group study. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. We'll be in touch.
Okay, bye.